Good morning. Genesis 31. We are continuing on with our studying biographies, and I'm going to guess probably more if you're a note taker and a record keeper than you have a strong memory. We actually spent a number of Sunday mornings working through the life of Jacob, and most of what I've been doing in Sunday school is kind of a repeat of what we did when we looked at his life. Anyway, we're going to, I don't know, we're going to get into the early part of September, and then I'm going to kind of bring this to a temporary halt, and we'll come back at some point in time in the future. Genesis 31, and we're going to kind of pick up in a second. Let's go ahead and pray. We'll pick up in verse number 22, and we will ultimately work our way down through the remainder of the chapter. Father, thank you always for creating us, for saving us, for making us in your image and dealing with us in a way that we can both reflect some of your attributes and ponder your attributes. And so we pray for wisdom that we might think properly about ourselves and properly about our lives and properly about you, that we might apply our hearts to wisdom. Teach us, please, to number our days that we might do this. We ask your blessing upon our time together today and pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, again, we're just walking through the inspired life events of this fascinating man, Jacob. And a man who is one of the patriarchs and certainly enjoying one of the prominent roles in the salvation story, a man who is dealing with his own personal problems and the own issues in his life. We have experienced along with him his supernatural birth, the word that came to his mother that although Jacob would be the youngest, he would be the recipient of God's blessings and the inheritor of the Abrahamic covenant. We have watched his, to use our word, I don't really know that it's the right Bible word, but the word that we would use to watch his dysfunctional family operate. His dad definitely favored the oldest son, and mom definitely favored the younger son, Jacob. And we watched the shenanigans of stealing, or at least being accused of stealing the birthright, or the blessing from his brother, the hostility that resulted from that. We watched Jacob run away from his brother Esau and his anger, Genesis 27:43. And now in Genesis 31:22, he is running again. He is this time running from his father-in-law, Laban. And we have, again, God has brought us into the story of his marriages and the competition and conflict between the two sisters over the children that they would have and the relationship that they would have with Jacob. And Genesis 31 brings us to the end of the Laban account. Laban kind of falls out of the Bible at this point in time, and he does not really return. Verses 22 through 25 constitute kind of three distinct scenarios, and we're just going to kind of read them together, and we'll notice the break. Verses 22 through 30 are Laban's pursuit of Jacob, beginning in verse number 22. It was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled. And he took his brethren with him and pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword? Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and didst not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with mirth, and with songs, and with tabret, and with harp? And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? So and of course we're going to come back and just kind of walk our way through some of the lessons in the story. But there is the first scenario in which Laban chases after Jacob, and he is intercepted, of course, by God, who gives him an admonition to be very careful in the way he speaks to Jacob and treats Jacob. 31 through 34, or really the end of verse number 30 through verse number 34, Laban accuses Jacob of stealing his deities. The end of verse number 30, Yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? And Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid, for I said, Peradventure thou wouldest take by force thy daughters from me. With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. Before our brethren discern what is thine with me, and take it to thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images, and put them in the camel's furniture, and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. She said to her father, verse 35, she said to her father, Let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. And Jacob was wroth and chode with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, What is my trespass? What is my sin, that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This 20 years have I been with thee, thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, the rams of thy flock have I not eaten, that which was torn of beasts I brought not unto thee, I bear the loss of it, of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night, thus I was. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God hath seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. So Laban pursues Jacob, is intercepted by God. Laban accuses Jacob of stealing his images, and they have an argument. That brings us to the third episode or scenario at this part of the chapter, verses 43 through 55, in which they make a covenant that is quite honestly very often misunderstood, and we will get to that. Verse number 43. And Laban answered and said unto Jacob, These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters, or unto their children which they have borne? Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, Gather stones, and they took stones and made an heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. And Laban called it Jegar-Shahudathah, but Jacob called it Galeed. And Laban said, This heap is a witness between me and thee this day. Therefore was the name of it called Galeed and Mizpah, for he said, The Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. If thou shalt afflict my daughters, or if thou shalt take other wives besides my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness betwixt me and thee. And Laban said to Jacob, Behold this heap, and behold this pillar which I have cast betwixt me and thee. This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, that thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge betwixt us. And Jacob sware by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount, and called his brethren to eat bread, and they did eat bread, and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned unto his place. So after God had told Jacob to return, and Jacob returns and talks to his father-in-law about returning, he concludes that it is best to steal away in the middle of the night, which he does with his wives and his children and his flocks and his herds. And Laban comes pursuing him. Folks, the whole relationship is colored with tension and suspicion and mistrust. This has been the nature of their interaction since almost the very beginning, when Leah somehow replaced Rachel as the first wife. Rachel has stolen her father's images. We kind of talked a little bit about that last week. I don't think that it really is a matter of idolatry, but of course it certainly could have been. But I don't think it was. I don't think that was why she took them. And Laban and Jacob make a covenant, this covenant of Mizpah, which, all right, I want to tread lightly here because I'm really not trying to be super critical, but has kind of become the symbol of absent friendship among many Christians. That, right, the Lord watch over you. No, we're not together, the Lord watch over you, and we're not together, the Lord watch over me, until we come together. But the real spirit of the covenant, folks, is Laban saying to Jacob, I don't think I trust you, so I want God to watch over you. You're not the kind of guy that I trust. And so you need a caretaker, and that caretaker is God. And again, I don't think I think that the text is obvious, that Jacob has no more respect and confidence in Laban than Laban has in Jacob. This is a severely broken relationship. Again, when Laban turns around in verse number 55 and walks away and returns unto his place, that is the end of him as far as the Bible story goes. There is no more Laban, and whatever becomes of him and it happens to him, we just are not informed. So with those three scenarios in mind, let's just kind of walk through and try and get at what the Lord is teaching us in this passage. They teach us, first of all, sadly, about the nature of humanity and human relationships. This long, long history now, 20 years, maybe 20 years plus, of suspicion and mistrust and deceit has finally come to a head. Laban makes his own accusations in verse number 26. He accuses Jacob basically of stealing his daughters and his grandchildren as if they were war captives. Verse number 30, which if you're looking at a King James Bible, you'll notice that the word yet at the end of verse number 30 is italicized. It is not part of the Hebrew text. The accusation apparently, I don't think from Laban's mind, but from the reader's standpoint, that the accusation just comes out of nowhere. Now, verse number 30, now though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house. Right? You could put the period there. That's the end. Why'd you leave? You left because you missed home. And then kind of this, hey, I get all that. Why'd you steal my gods? Why'd you steal my deities? Jacob, for his part, expresses his own dissatisfaction with the history of the relationship. Verse number 31, why did you run away? Right? Jacob's answer in verse number 31 goes beyond just the stolen images, which he doesn't know about. It is his explanation of why he left the way that he did. Why did you leave the way you did? Verse 31. Because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure thou wouldest take by force thy daughters from me. Why did you run away in the middle of the night? Because I didn't think you'd let me leave with all my family. These are not bosom buddies. These are not pals. And we noted a couple of years ago that in verses 36 through 42, when Jacob goes through his lengthy and articulate list of complaints about Laban, that it is highly unlikely that this is spontaneous and off the cuff, that he has been nursing this for a number of years, that he has been thinking about all of the abuses that he has suffered at the hands of Laban, his father-in-law. Which brings us to this, folks, right? What do we do with that? Well, right, here's a place for us to kind of pause and ponder that. It is little wonder that God speaks so often and so directly about human relationships. Nothing that I'm just kind of trying to, I'm sorry, I'm not really having a senior moment. I'm debating how far I want to delve into some things. Paul tells us as much as possible to live peaceably with all men. But the Bible understanding is that kind of harmony is not going to be realistically a possibility. There are going to be some people, and sometimes people even within your own family, with whom you just cannot get along. And you do not get along. But the Bible nevertheless governs these kinds of things and tells us specifically what to do. For instance, we'll come back to Genesis 31, but look, if you would, at Matthew chapter 5. For instance, God tells us to make every effort to resolve conflict quickly. Matthew 5:25, agree with thine adversary quickly, whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. And obviously there are intimations in the text that there's more going on here than a disagreement over what we had for lunch. Right? There are legal aspects. But get it resolved quickly. We all know the passage, Ephesians 4:26, be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your anger. So God tells us to deal with things speedily. And I would just point out, folks, that is, to me, a fascinating set of instructions in light of how absolutely tolerant and patient God is with human foolishness. That God himself is not quick and hasty, but he tells us, look, if you're in an adversarial relationship, if there is a conflict, try to get it resolved. Try to come to terms. Don't let things fester. And I think that we all know, folks, that letting certain things go is a very hard thing, but ultimately, this is not psychology, this is Bible. Ultimately, we are the ones most damaged by our anger and our bitterness. That is exactly what the book of Hebrews tells us. Right? It doesn't do us any good spiritually to carry on hostility, to carry on anger, to bear perpetual and continual grudges. Secondly, the Bible tells us to make every effort to resolve conflict personally. Matthew 18:15. Matthew 18:15, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. So look, folks, right, let me just talk to you pastorally for a second. There is a place and a role for a pastor in conflict. There's no doubt about that. But the pastor is not the first person to be involved in a conflict in a church setting, right? The pastor is not the first person to get involved in the conflict. Matthew 18:15 is very clear. If you have a conflict with a brother, you try to deal with it brother to brother. That's where it belongs. That's where it belongs first. It might end up in some third-party position like a pastor or an elder or a deacon or an outside counselor. It might ultimately end up in the presence of the entire church. Matthew 18 makes provision for all of that, but that is not where it begins. And I say this to you as a guy who has no pleasure. I mean, some people just like to fight. Have you noticed that? Some people like to fight. And I think most people do not like to fight and do not like the conflict. But biblically, folks, we are just simply not allowed to take our wounds and our offenses and tell them to our confidants and then just let the wound fester against the offending party. That is just simple disobedience. Look, if you can, and I'm going to get to this in a minute, you can turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 right now. Because I think it makes a principle that extends beyond even money, would be the way I would understand the principle. Right? Jacob and Laban are in conflict. There have been brewing tensions, unresolved issues from the very beginning, and now the thing has come to a head, and they've both acted, and they've both made their accusations. Right? God speaks to all of us. Deal as quickly as you can. Deal with the issue personally. If you are the one offended, you're the one who needs to take the initiative. Unless it was genuinely the kind of thing, folks, that you can bear in good spirit all by yourself, which is where I think 1 Corinthians 6:7 has some extended application. Verse number 7, 1 Corinthians 6. Paul has been rebuking the church for members going to what we would call secular courts against each other for financial redress. And Paul just finds that absolutely stunningly abhorrent. Verse number 7, now therefore there is utterly a fault among you, clearly, completely, unequivocally, a fault among you, because ye go to law one with another. Why do ye not rather take wrong? Why don't you just take the wrong? Why do you not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? And come on, folks, we're not idiots. The answer to the question is built into the question, right? Because I don't want to be wronged, and I shouldn't have to be defrauded. It's my money, it's my family, it's my ego, it's my reputation, it's me. And it's not right that I should have to be treated like that. To which God would say, you are absolutely right. But it's better that you be treated like that than you dishonor the church in your conduct. So realistically, folks, sometimes the thing to do with the wrong is just to swallow it. I mean, there is a righteous judge and a righteous judgment coming. Right? I mean, whatever I have done to people, and it is beyond argument that in 69 years of living and 42 years of pastoring that I have been the offender. Right? I don't get away with anything. In the first place, Christ paid for all sins, which doesn't give anybody an excuse to sin. And secondly, I have a judgment coming. Now again, does that mean everything gets swept under the rug, or as the Bible puts it, love covereth a multitude of sins? No. But neither are we obligated to deal with every offense as if it is the issue of the day that must be addressed. So God talks to us often and pointedly. He gives us clear instruction. Attempt to resolve conflicts quickly. Attempt to resolve them personally. Be willing, if necessary, to suffer the wrong for the sake of his name. Remember the faithfulness of God. Right? Peter says, and of course the context here is being persecuted by unbelievers. Wherefore let them suffer that suffer according to the will of God. Commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing as unto a faithful Creator. Or as Paul instructs us in Romans 12:19, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. So it would be nice if there were never conflicts, if we were, let me back that up. We think it would be nice. I think it would be nice if there was never conflict, if there was never tension, if nobody ever wounded anybody, if nobody ever lied to anybody, if nobody ever cheated anybody. But we don't live in that world. We do not live in that world. And we are obligated to live as obedient Christians because we live in a world that is contrary to the one that is the ideal. So, Paul tells us in the book of Colossians to let our speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt. Seasoned with salt. So to go back to Genesis chapter 31, as we think about the passage, there are lessons for us about the nature of humanity, sadly in conflict. But as always, folks, because the Bible is not just a horizontal book about us, the Bible is also a vertical book about God. These episodes instruct us about the nature of God. Genesis 31:24. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. I think the implications there. Threats you cannot keep, promises you cannot keep. God is the protector of his people. In verse number 42, to his credit, Jacob recognizes the protecting hand of God. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me. So Jacob doesn't say, you met your match in me, buddy boy. Jacob says, if the Lord hadn't been my protector, who knows what you'd have done to me? Right? I mean, Christ protects our eternal souls by washing away our sins with his blood. He protects us physically. Until the time that it is for us to die, because die we will in these bodies, which is part of our eternal spiritual protection. John 17:24, Father, I will that they also whom thou hast given me be with me where I am. And of course, within most of our worldviews, we passionately hope that the rapture is the answer to that. But it hasn't happened yet, and most people will die, it appears, to be with the Lord. But as we read through Genesis 31, folks, we must note that God is not simply the protector of his people, he is the protector of his program. Look at verse number 42. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. I don't think that Jacob is suggesting that Laban was afraid of Isaac. I wonder what his dad's going to do. But that Jacob had the kind of fear of God that Isaac did, and God threatened Laban. This is not really the way that we think about God, folks, is it? And this is Genesis 31:24 is a little bit at odds with our teddy bear image of God. To basically pull Laban aside and look him in the eye and go, I'm watching you, and you better not cross a boundary here. You are perilously close to meddling with something that is bigger than you imagine. And I just go through that, folks, because, right, one of the things, and again, at some point I'm assuming we'll come back into the Genesis story. We'll pick up with the life of Jacob, and we'll work through the remainder at not at this depth of a level, but with Jacob's sons. What is always in view, really throughout all of the Bible, because the New Testament develops it, but particularly in the life of Jacob and his sons, are the implications of the Abrahamic covenant. So to go off, to get a little bit ahead of myself, when you get to that passage that seems to come out of nowhere, Genesis chapter 38, and the immorality of Judah, right? That has to be read in light of the way that it might impact the Abrahamic covenant, just like we have to go back and read Genesis 16, the birth of Ishmael, in light of what it might mean to the Abrahamic covenant. So we have Abraham, we have Isaac, we have now Jacob. Two of these men are dead, Abraham and Isaac. And Laban is plotting his vengeance on the third. That's probably the reason that you have Genesis 31:24. If I can put it this way without being offensive, because there is so much more at stake than just Jacob's physical well-being. If Laban were to put his hands around Jacob's throat, right, we have imperiled the Abrahamic covenant. That cannot happen. So it is not God's normal habit to go around threatening people, warning them with eternal condemnation, yes, but making these kinds of threats, no. So God is the protector of his people, God is the protector of his program, and God is the protector of his name. What do we make of this? Right? I'm going to get back here to the passage where she steals with the conversation. Go back to verse number 30, the end of verse number 30. Yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? And Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure thou wouldst take me by force to force thy daughters from me. With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. Before our brethren to serve thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tent, but he found them not. Then he went out to Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images, and put them in a camel's furniture, and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. Why are we told all that? And I would suggest to you folks that what the text is doing is making fun of idolatry. Right? Laban has these gods. They're not massive monuments like you would find at an Egyptian temple today if you were to go to Egypt. But they're small household gods, little images that he used in his worship. And so just kind of think through some of the implications of what's going on here. What does it say about your deity if somebody else could steal it? What does it say about your deity if it is helpless to defend itself or act on its own behalf? These are the kind of questions that God asks people about idols. These are the kind of satirical statements God makes about them. They have eyes, but they can't see. They have ears, but they can't hear. They have hands, but they can't act. Implication, you're crazy for worshiping them. You're crazy for giving to them some kind of power and recognition that they are not worthy to have. What does it say about a deity that it is subjected to human uncleanness? And although Jacob and Rachel certainly do not know that, when we get into the book of Leviticus, we will discover that the topic of their conversation is counted as one of those human impurities that must be addressed. Right? So God is, in this passage, folks, you have a contrast between the name and the nature of God and the name and the nature of idols. Right, to go back to Genesis 31:24, God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night. God had been observing this whole scenario unfold. Nobody had to tell him where anybody was, what was going on. He's right there. He shows up. He takes care of business. Meanwhile, Laban's idols are being toted along in the baggage. Sightless, soundless, speechless, helpless. The great contrast. Turn, if you would, towards the end of the Old Testament, or towards the end of the New Testament, to 1 John chapter 5. Because, folks, idolatry is always a problem. Idolatry is not just the creation and the veneration of little images. Idolatry is substitute deity. And so you have 1 John chapter 5 and number 21, little children, keep yourselves from idols. Or Acts chapter 21. Acts chapter 21 and verse number 25. As touching the Gentiles which believe, people like us, right? As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, and from blood, and from strangled, because when you strangle an animal, you do not let it bleed out, and you're not allowed to eat the blood. Right? One of the very few New Testament prohibitions is against eating the blood. New Testament prohibitions about food, and from fornication. And folks, I would just point out to you, it's a lesson to itself. We've dealt with it a number of times here in our services. But the concept of things that are offered to idols, found in Acts chapter 21, verse number 25, is a significant New Testament consideration. It is not a minor New Testament consideration. It is a major New Testament consideration. The association of sacred things with idolatrous things. It occupies 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10. It occupies the churches in Revelation 2 through 4. What sin did you commit? You tolerated those who offered things in sacrifice to idols. Even though, as Paul will freely admit in 1 Corinthians 10, the idol is not anything. Right? So, I mean, just in your head, put a little statue. Let's make it a good American statue. Let's make it a football. Right? Little silver football. And we're going to offer things to it that belong to God. Is there any power in the silver statue? No. Does anybody really think there's power in the silver statue? Probably not. What's the real issue that is going on here? The real issue that is going on here is what's going on in the human heart. Just like in Laban's day. The statues had no power, but they still had power over Laban's heart. He wanted his images. That's the problem with idolatry, folks. That's why Paul can call covetousness idolatry, Colossians 3:5. Idolatry is not a matter of statues, it's a matter of heart. And since it's a matter of heart, it's a matter of problem for New Testament Christianity, even people like us who live in what we think is a completely secular world, which it is not, but that's another conversation. Everybody in this story, to bring it down, right? I'm out of time. Everybody in this story, Jacob himself, Laban himself, Moses, the man we understand to be narrating the story for us, are giving evidence to God's sovereign protection of Jacob. Right? We are safe and secure in his sovereign hand. All right, I'm gonna, questions, comments, critiques, observations before we go? Don't have a lot of time, but I don't want to ignore you. All right, we'll be back at 11 o'clock.